It is Tuesday morning in Al Quoz industrial area, the part of Dubai that does not appear in the tourism brochures. The temperature is already climbing past 40 degrees Celsius, which is roughly 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is not yet 9 in the morning. A line of buses with tinted windows pulls up to a labor camp on the edge of the warehouse district, and the men who climb down from them have been awake since 4. They will work until the heat becomes physically impossible, rest during the hottest hours under government mandate, and then work again until sunset. They are not tourists. They are not expats with corner offices in the Dubai International Financial Center. They are the men who built the towers you see in the postcards. There are roughly 3 million of them, give or take, depending on which year you count and which definition of resident you accept. And the central, inconvenient fact about their lives is this: most of them cannot leave. Not because the borders are sealed, not because there is a wall. They cannot leave because the financial, legal, and contractual architecture of Dubai has been engineered over 40 years to make leaving an act of personal ruin. This is the story of how a city built itself into something that functions, for millions of its own residents, as a kind of prison without bars. Not a prison of stone, a prison of paperwork. Before we go further, let me be precise about what this video is and what it is not. This is not a story about slavery in the literal legal sense. The United Arab Emirates abolished the harshest version of the kafala sponsorship system in 2022 and has passed labor reforms that some international observers have, in certain narrow areas, praised. This is a story about something more subtle and arguably more durable. It is a story about how a city can comply with the letter of modern labor law while constructing, around its workers and even around its middle-class professionals, a web of debt, documentation, and dependency so tight that voluntary departure becomes, for most, mathematically impossible. And to understand how that happened, you have to understand what Dubai was promising, to whom, and at what real cost. You have to see the architecture not as accident, but as design. The promise was simple and, for a long time, genuinely seductive. Come to Dubai, earn tax-free income, send money home, build a life. For a Filipino nurse, a Pakistani driver, a Kenyan security guard, a Bangladeshi construction worker, the math on paper looked transformative. A salary of 1,500 dirhams per month, which is roughly 408 United States dollars, was 3 or 4 times what the same person could earn in their home country. Multiply that across 2 years, send most of it home, and you could build a house, marry off a sister, put children through school. For middle-class professionals from India, Egypt, Lebanon, the United Kingdom, the calculation was even more attractive. Senior roles paying 20,000 or 30,000 dirhams a month, which is between $5,400 and $8,100 with no income tax, in a city with year-round sunshine and direct flights to anywhere. Millions of people made that calculation. They moved. They believed. And for the first decade or so, for many of them, the math actually worked. Houses got built in Kerala. Children got educated in Manila. Mothers received remittances in Lahore. The promise, in its early years, delivered on a meaningful fraction of what it advertised. This did not begin overnight. The architecture of dependency was built one regulation, one contract, one debt at a time, over 40 years of legislative drift and market expansion. Here is where the numbers begin to tell a story that the glossy reports do not. According to the most recent data from the Dubai Statistics Center, the population of the Emirate stood at approximately 3.8 million people by late 2025. Of those, fewer than 400,000 are Emirati citizens. The remainder, roughly 3.4 million people, are non-citizen residents whose legal right to be in the country is tied directly to either an employment contract or a property investment. Knight Frank's most recent residential market report, published in early 2026, noted that average rents in prime Dubai districts have risen by approximately 70% since 2021. Bayut and Property Finder, the two largest real estate platforms in the country, Both confirm that a one-bedroom apartment in Dubai Marina now rents for between 90,000 and 120,000 dirhams per year, which is between 24,500 and 32,700 United States dollars annually, paid most commonly in either 1 or 4 post-dated checks. Read that again. 1 or 4 checks, upfront, for the entire year. That is not a corrective detail. That is the structural foundation of the trap. Because here's what Mercer's 2025 cost of living survey documented with brutal clarity. Dubai is now the 15th most expensive city in the world for expatriates, ahead of Paris, ahead of Tokyo, ahead of Sydney. And here is what the Hayes GCC Salary and Employment Report for 2025 documented alongside it. Salaries in the Emirates have grown on average between 2 and 4% per year over the same period that rents have grown by 70%. That is not a gap. That is a chasm. The Oxford Economics Regional Forecast for the Gulf, published in late 2025, described the divergence between cost of living and wage growth in Dubai as, in their analysis, structurally unsustainable for any worker earning below the 90th percentile of the income distribution. Translated into plain language, if you are not in the top 10% of earners, the math has stopped working. And yet the people are still there, 3 million of them. Why? The answer is not loyalty. The answer is not opportunity. The answer is paperwork. This is the question the Catalyst event has begun to answer, and the Catalyst event is not a single moment. It is a slow accumulation of pressure that became impossible to ignore over the course of 2025. Throughout that year, a series of cases reached international media attention. Al Jazeera, The Guardian, the BBC, and Reuters all ran investigations into a phenomenon that immigration lawyers in the Emirates have been quietly documenting for years. The phenomenon is this: when a worker, whether a construction laborer or a marketing director, reaches the point where they want to leave Dubai, they discover that they cannot. Not legally. Not without consequences that for most are financially catastrophic. The discovery usually arrives at the worst possible moment. After a redundancy, after a divorce, after a parent dies in the home country, after the body has finally registered that the math no longer adds up. The mechanism is a combination of 3 legal instruments that individually exist in many countries, but in combination, in the specific way they are deployed in the Emirates, function as a financial cage. The first is the security check, the post-dated check that landlords require for the full annual rent. Bouncing that check is, under Federal Decree Law No. 14 of 2020, a civil matter in most circumstances, but it remains a criminal matter when used as a guarantee for a debt the debtor is deemed to have known they could not honor. The second is the personal loan taken out almost universally by middle-class residents to cover the upfront rent check, school fees, or a car. Defaulting on that loan or attempting to leave the country with the loan unpaid can trigger a travel ban issued by the courts at the request of the bank. The third is the absconding report, which an employer can file against a worker who leaves their job without permission, and which results in immediate cancellation of the residence visa and, in many cases, a ban on re-entering the country for up to a year. Stack those 3 instruments on top of a worker who came to Dubai with nothing, took a loan to pay the recruitment agency in their home country, took another loan to pay the first year's rent, and is now earning a salary that has not kept pace with the cost of the city, and you have a person who is, in every practical sense, unable to leave. Maria Santos, a Filipina nurse who had worked in Dubai for 9 years, told The Guardian in October 2025 that she had wanted to return to Manila for 3 years but could not, because the personal loan she had taken to bring her mother for medical treatment in 2023 carried a balance that, if she defaulted, would result in a travel ban and possible criminal referral. She described her situation in one sentence. She said, "I did not come here to be free. I came here to send money home, and now I cannot do either." Her case is not exceptional. It is representative. The conflict between the brand of Dubai and the lived reality of its residents did not create these vulnerabilities. It exposed them. The reforms of the past 5 years did not dismantle the architecture of dependency. They softened its edges while leaving its foundation intact. The impact of this architecture is not uniform. It falls in three layers, and to understand Dubai honestly, you have to see all three. At the top sit the genuinely wealthy. The Russian oligarchs who relocated after 2022, the Indian industrialists with second homes on the Palm, the European hedge fund managers who keep apartments in the Burj Khalifa for tax residency purposes. For this layer, Dubai is exactly what it advertises itself to be: a frictionless playground of zero income tax, world-class infrastructure, and absolute discretion. Knight Frank's Wealth Report 2025 documented that the number of ultra-high net worth individuals in Dubai grew by approximately 18% year over year, the fastest growth of any city in the world. For these residents, the question of whether one can leave is meaningless. They have multiple passports, multiple residencies, and assets distributed across 3 continents. They are in Dubai because they choose to be, and they will leave whenever they choose. The architecture of dependency does not touch them because they were never inside it. The second layer is the professional middle class, and this is where the trap is most visible to international audiences because this is where the audience of this video most likely lives. The British marketing manager, the Indian software engineer, the Lebanese architect, the South African finance director. These are people earning between 15,000 and 40,000 dirhams per month, which is between $4,000 and $10,900. On paper, comfortable. In practice, increasingly squeezed. They pay 60 to 70% of their income on rent and school fees. They take personal loans to bridge the gap between salary cycles and rent cycles. They drive cars they financed because the public transport does not reach the suburbs where they can afford to live. And when they decide they have had enough, they discover that leaving requires settling debts that, on their salary, would take 18 months of saving. They no longer have the margin to do. James Henderson, a British project manager who had worked in Dubai for 11 years, told the BBC in November 2025 that when he finally decided to return to Manchester after the breakdown of his marriage, he discovered that the combined balance of his car loan, his credit card, and the remaining months on his rental contract amounted to roughly the entire value of his end-of-service gratuity. He left, in his words, with the clothes in a single suitcase and a bank balance of zero. Many of the middle-class residents do not leave at all. They stay not because they want to, but because the math of leaving is worse than the math of staying. And this is just one piece of the puzzle. I documented the full pattern in my book, Cities Collapsing. Link in the description. But back to Dubai, because the third layer is where the architecture reveals what it really is. The third layer is the working class. 3 million people, by most credible estimates, working in construction, security, hospitality, domestic service, transport, and retail. Many of them arrived already in debt, having paid recruitment fees of between $1,000 and $3,000 to agencies in Dhaka, Lahore, Manila, Kathmandu, or Lagos. Those fees, which are technically illegal under Emirati law and are supposed to be paid by the employer, are in practice paid by the worker who borrows from family or from informal lenders at interest rates that compound monthly. The worker arrives in Dubai already owing more than they will earn in their first year. Their passport is, in some cases, still held by the employer, despite this practice having been formally banned. Their accommodation is provided in labor camps where 8 or 12 men share a room. Their salary, often delayed by weeks or months, is wired home to pay down the original recruitment debt before they see any of it themselves. The MigrantRights.org annual report for 2025 documented over 4,000 individual cases of wage theft in the Emirates over the previous 12 months, and that figure is acknowledged by the organization itself as a fraction of the actual incidents. A taxi driver from Peshawar who spoke to a Reuters reporter on condition that only his first name, Imran, be used, described his situation in terms that capture the entire architecture in a single image. He said his salary covered the rent of his shared bunk, the food, and the monthly payment to his recruitment broker back home, and that after 7 years in Dubai, he had saved exactly nothing and could not afford the airline ticket to return. The dream was never one dream. It was 3 or 4 entirely different dreams sold under the same brand. And when the math stopped working, each layer was caught in a different version of the same trap. The structural vulnerabilities that produced this were not accidents. They were design choices made over 40 years by people who understood exactly what they were building. Vulnerability 1. The entire economic model of Dubai depends on a constant rotation of temporary residents who never gain political rights, never gain citizenship, and never gain the leverage that comes with permanence. A worker who cannot vote, cannot organize, and cannot stay indefinitely is a worker who cannot demand structural change. This is not a bug in the system. It is the system. The model assumes turnover. It assumes that any individual who becomes too expensive, too sick, too old, or too inconvenient can be replaced by another individual on a fresh 2-year contract from a country with a weaker bargaining position. The arithmetic of replacement is the foundation of the labor market. Vulnerability 2. The legal architecture treats debt as a moral failing of the individual rather than a systemic outcome of a market in which wages and costs have decoupled. The criminalization of bounced checks, even after the 2020 reform, remains a uniquely powerful tool of social control because it converts a civil obligation into a personal liberty issue. In most developed economies, failing to pay a debt is unpleasant but not criminal. In the Emirates, depending on the circumstances and the size of the debt, it can result in custody, deportation, and a permanent prohibition on return. That asymmetry between the cost of borrowing and the cost of failing to repay is what gives the personal loan in Dubai its peculiar weight. It is not just a financial product. It is a leash. Vulnerability 3. The dependency on the employer for the visa, even after the introduction of the green visa and the golden visa, means that for the vast majority of residents, the right to remain in the country is tied to the willingness of a specific person, the employer, to continue sponsoring them. The green visa, introduced in 2022, allows certain skilled workers to sponsor themselves for 5 years. It is a real reform. But the eligibility criteria, the salary threshold, and the documentation requirements mean that in practice, fewer than 10% of foreign residents qualify. For the other 90%, the visa remains employer-tied. That dependency cannot be reformed away while the underlying structure remains. It can only be ameliorated at the margins. Vulnerability 4, and this is the one that operates beneath the others. The entire population of Dubai has been rebuilt over the past 2 decades into a population that has nowhere else to go. A British engineer who has lived in Dubai for 15 years, whose children have been educated in Dubai, whose professional network is in Dubai, whose savings are in dirhams, is not really an expat anymore. He is a long-term resident with no path to citizenship, no pension entitlement, and a UK property market he can no longer afford to re-enter. A Filipino nurse who has spent 10 years in Dubai has aged out of the recruitment age brackets used by hospitals in Canada and Australia. She cannot start over. She can only continue. The trap is not only legal and financial, it is biographical. And here's the voice from inside that makes this analysis impossible to dismiss as external criticism. Habib Al-Mullah, one of the most prominent Emirati lawyers in the country and a former chairman of the Dubai Financial Services Authority, has written publicly and repeatedly over the past several years about the need for further reform of the labor visa system. In a 2024 column for The National, the Abu Dhabi-based newspaper, he argued that the Emirates would not be able to retain the talent it had attracted unless it created a clearer pathway from temporary residency to long-term security, and unless it dismantled the financial instruments that, in his words, turn ordinary economic difficulty into a question of personal freedom. When a senior Emirati lawyer writing in an Emirati newspaper says that the system turns economic difficulty into a question of personal freedom, the analysis stops being a foreign critique and becomes an internal acknowledgement. He is not the only one. Mishal Al-Gergawi, an Emirati commentator who writes for several regional outlets, has argued that the country's long-term competitiveness depends on rethinking the relationship between residency and contribution. These voices are not radicals. They are establishment figures who can see, from the inside, what the brochures do not show. There is one more dimension that the official discourse rarely names, and it is worth saying clearly. The architecture of dependency is invisible to the people for whom Dubai works. A tourist who spends 4 nights at the Atlantis sees nothing of it. A businessman who flies in for a conference at the Madinat Jumeirah sees nothing of it. A LinkedIn influencer who posts a video from a brunch at the Burj Al Arab sees nothing of it. The system is engineered to be invisible to the very people whose continued belief in Dubai keeps the inflows of capital and tourism alive. The 3 million who cannot leave are not in the marketing material. They are in the buses to Al Quoz at 5 in the morning. They are in the kitchens behind the restaurants. They are in the security uniforms in the lobbies. They are in the construction sites behind the hoardings. The invisibility is not accidental. It is also part of the design. So, what comes next? Dubai has shown repeatedly that it can adapt operationally with extraordinary speed. The 2020 labor reforms were real. The introduction of the golden visa created, for a small slice of residents, a genuine pathway to 10-year security. The decriminalization of certain bounced check cases removed one of the sharpest edges of the system. The introduction of unemployment insurance in 2023, modest as it is, was a meaningful step. These are not nothing. They are real reforms, and ignoring them would be dishonest. The city has demonstrated again and again that it can make targeted improvements when the international reputational cost of inaction becomes too high. The question is not whether Dubai can reform. It clearly can. The question is whether the reforms can move faster than the underlying contradiction is sharpening. Because operational reform and structural reform are different projects on different timelines. The operational machinery of Dubai, the airports, the malls, the hotels, the construction sites, will continue to function with the precision the city is famous for. The structural question, whether a city can continue to function as a global hub when 3 million of its residents cannot, in any practical sense, leave, is a question that operates on the timescale of a generation. The answer to that question is not something that can be announced in a press release. It will be revealed slowly in migration statistics, in remittance flows, in the decisions of the next generation of nurses and engineers and drivers about whether the math for them still works. It will be revealed in whether the daughters of the Filipino nurses who came in 2010 decide to follow their mothers, or whether they choose Toronto and Sydney and Berlin instead. It will be revealed in whether the British project managers of 2030 see Dubai as a destination or as a cautionary tale told by their parents. If you have lived in Dubai or worked there or sent money home from there or watched a family member do any of those things, the question I want to leave you with is this. Did the math work for you? Did you leave when you wanted to, or did you stay because leaving was not really an option? Did the city deliver what it promised? Or did it deliver something else dressed in the same brochure? Tell me in the comments. I read them, and the lived experience of people who have been inside this system is more valuable than any report I can cite. And if this kind of in-depth analysis of what is really happening in the most watched cities in the world is what you are looking for here, you already know what to do.